There's a group of people who think the British are the best sea kayakers, and there's a group that believe the Americans are the real sea kayakers and the Europeans are way behind. And the people who are sort of rolling connoisseurs prefer a Greenland style boat for rolling. There really were two places that kayaking achieved its sort of greatest advance, and that was Greenland and the Aleutian Islands. Through genetic evidence, we're getting a much better picture of what really happened. And it does seem pretty clear that kayaking culture became established in the Aleutians roughly 10,000 years ago, and in Greenland much more recently. Greenland people came to it later. What appealed to me about the Aleut designs, and there's just a very strong technical argument why they are the best designs. It's because of the environment. In Greenland, you only kayaked part of the year. The rest of the year is frozen solid. But the Aleutians were on the Pacific with a warm, relatively warm ocean. So the Aleuts not only kayaked year-round, but they kayaked long distances. If you were doing what I wanted to do, travel long distances in the ocean and carry lots of gear, there was no question the Aleut design was the design of choice. Where the BAIDARKA was so off the charts was just efficiency. You have a quarter horsepower maximum power and what you can get out of it. It's just amazing. It's like a piece of music where everything fits, and I no longer have any sort of illusions of changing that or improving on it other than to execute it in detail better, but not differently.
This is wonderful. We've known you for years and known about you for years, and you have become ultra famous for history of technology. You've had this amazing bestseller. It's extraordinary. Tell us a little bit about what it was like toward the end of your run in Princeton, when you were in high school. Talk a little bit about high school.
I was terribly unhappy in high school, as many students are, and I think it's a tremendous loss to humanity that we sort of treat high school students so poorly. If you look at most of the great geniuses, the real Mozarts and people like that, they started at high school age, if not less, and that's the time at which we extinguish talent rather than nurture it. What irritated me was that our high school, which I think was typical of the time, tried to differentiate people into two classes. There were students who were going to go on and do things with their hands, and there were students who were going to go on and do things with their minds, and they tried to separate those two. Either you went into vocational ed and learned how to run machine tools, or you were going to go to university. And I sort of refused that distinction and left. I didn't try to drop out. I tried to finish early, and then we had a very unpleasant assistant principal who said no. I fulfilled what I was told were all the requirements to leave in 3 years, and then he said, no, you didn't have 4 years of PE. You can't graduate. And that made me so mad, I just left. So that gave me a sort of disrespect for authority, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I ended up going to Vancouver, British Columbia. I had an older sister who got married there. And I saw a classified ad in the newspaper for a job on a boat. Answered the ad. So overnight, my life changed. I mean, I had romanticized about boats and built model boats. Bill had built a kayak when I was 12, but knew nothing about real working boats. The captain was a logger. He grew up in a world completely different from mine, where he had read 2 books in his life. Grew up with chainsaws and logging camps, and I mean, what was it like when this 17-year-old kid shows up who has never seen a chainsaw? We just started immediately working our way up and down the coast, delivering things, taking charter, doing whatever we could to make money with this boat. Boy, he taught me a lot. nothing was explained. He would just, hand you a chainsaw and say, do this. And in a way that seems completely crazy and dangerous today, but that's how you learned. You learned by just by doing things. We went around Cape Scott on Halloween night, and no instruments. I mean, now, no radio, a compass, but no GPS, nothing. We picked up, some other kid came along who was so scared he was praying.
So how long did you hang out with Jim?
Most of 2 years. And then it just came to an end.
Without any further ado, let's give the floor to George Dyson.
I came away from meeting him after having some beer and pizza, and I thought I'd met the keeper of the Grail, They had this exquisite armatures of this, kayaks in progress there, and some musty old pictures of his excursions up north. And he has watercolors of fleets of kayaks, and his library and of all this collected lore and legends of the Aleutian kayak. It was really, really fun to meet this guy. So I went home and devoted myself to try to clean up my life so I could make a boat. So it wasn't, there was a lot of things to clear up.
Literally, we were coming down Georgia Strait. I used to say that, we hit this log, but it's not true. We didn't hit it. It was a near miss. Big cedar log. And then we towed that log into Vancouver Harbor to Belcara, where we knew these people who lived in this lodge. And so we dropped the log off here, and then I decided to stay with the log. It turned out that it was a restaurant in Deep Cove that wanted shakes. They were calling themselves the Log Cabin Restaurant. And so I ended up staying at Belcara to split up this log and got off the boat and then never went back. So half the log got sold to the Log Cabin Restaurant. The other half became my treehouse. So that's how the treehouse happened. That's what allowed me to build all those kayaks, because I sort of had a place to live, and this former lodge had, like everything in those times, it had a bunch of outbuildings. I mean, it had a blacksmith shop and a carpenter's shop, and so there was lots of facilities there that I could use for boat building.
How high up were you?
It was 95 feet up. A tree in the forest would be impossible to climb, but this was on the beach, so it had branches that grew out over the water, all the way up. So it was like a ladder going up. As long as you move one hand or foot at a time, you're safer than walking down the street. I don't think it was dangerous. It just definitely, you could separate people who had fear of heights and not. If you had fear of heights, you wouldn't climb up there. I was very lucky to end up in Canada, where there was really not the class distinctions we have in America. This is how America originally was and was supposed to be, but we've sort of lost it. I think it would have been very hard to do anywhere else. This was 6 miles from downtown Vancouver. It's incomprehensible, but all of Vancouver Harbor had squatters living everywhere. Every little corner, people lived in beautiful little cottages, but they didn't own the land. You just didn't mess with them. If squatters' rights was a real thing. It's the last of a whole era when it was really a socially acceptable thing to do, to go up the inlet and find a place and build a cottage. So the treehouse, in that context, it wasn't that strange. I had already built one kayak in Vancouver.
What kind of kayak was it?
It was a Nunivak Island design that I got a copy of Howard Chappell's Bark Canoes and Skin Boats in North America. At that time you could still buy for $2.75. And in there I saw this plan of a Nunivak Island kayak that I thought looked really cool. It had a hole in the front. It actually is a very poor design. It was about the worst design I could have picked. Very unstable. But I built a copy of that with aluminum tubing.
Why aluminum tubing?
I couldn't find any good wood, and I had a Kelty pack frame made out of aluminum tubing. It seemed like such incredibly light, strong stuff, and I found out, where you get it. It didn't cost less than $50 to buy the tubing to build this. But it wasn't big enough. It was too unstable and not big enough to travel in. So then I heard about these Russian BAIDARKAs, which were 25 or 30 feet long.
Where did you hear about them?
They're mentioned in Chappell's book. He includes a 2-hatch BAIDARKA, but no 3-hatch. So I just took his drawing of the 2-hatch BAIDARKA and made my own interpretation of what a 3-hatch BAIDARKA would be. So I built that boat, and it was just fantastic. It was great. I mean, it was everything I imagined it would be, which is why the Russians liked them, because they would go around collecting hundreds and hundreds of sea otter skins, and they could bring them back in these big, huge kayaks. Those boats are amazingly stable empty, and then if you've got 200 pounds of gear in them, you can get out and walk along the deck. I had little sails on it. It sailed like crazy.
Did you have charts, or did you?
I had a few paper charts, but no, nothing that would qualify as a Coast Guard approved life jacket or anything like that. Just wool, a lot of wool clothes. Headed north and went back up to that area around Aleut Bay.
George let me know there was one of those big 3-holers down in Tamales Bay there in California where I lived, and he built 6 of these boats, but one of them ended up down in there, and he said I could go find it and take it for a ride. It was under the custody of some other fellow who'd joined him on that expedition of the 6 kayaks up north, but I wasn't able to contact him. Had a date, a gal, and we took off with that boat, and we went off on our scenic cruise. I'm paddling along, and along the shoreline there at Tamales Bay, it's a long, skinny body of water. There were sirens and red lights going, and I thought some poor soul's been busted, and they were after me. I didn't know it, We got back after dark, and all of the Marin's finest were there waiting for me to round up this thief. And I just explained the situation to him. The owner of this boat is up in a treehouse up in north of Vancouver, Canada. And if you just let the phone ring long enough, you'll hear it. And so it took about 15 minutes for him to answer the phone, but I told him I was cool. They let me off the hook. It was fun.
If you produce a good book or a great film or a great album, then everybody expects your next thing to be
Bigger and better.
twice as good, yeah. So I built this 16-foot kayak, and then I built this 31-foot double, and I wanted to build, I was trying to build a 62-foot kayak. Real Mount Fairweather was going to be 62 feet long. I had no sense of scale. I mean, I was very, very naive. I tried to get money from the Canadian government at that time, was funding projects. I wrote this grant proposal and they said no. I worked on a fishing boat that year, and I bought enough aluminum tubing to build this 48-foot kayak, six hull. And it was just way too big. It made no sense. It was no longer a kayak. But anyway, it was what it was. It was a very interesting experiment, and it sort of showed what was barely possible. It was like there's always sort of the largest animal, and then things scale back. It had too many sort of crippling disadvantages. Just a Tlingit or Nootka canoe that size, would have a dozen strong paddlers who'd been paddling all their life. It was sort of crazy to build a 6-person kayak without 6 people.
So there you were in Canada, and you had kind of set yourself up. What was it about Canada that you liked?
Well, Canada was, first of all, very welcoming. In America, if there was real wilderness, it was in national parks, where it might be wilderness, but it was a very controlled wilderness. Whereas in Canada, it was truly open wilderness. There were these entire stretches of coastline, some still uncharted, that were not parked. They were just crown land. They belonged to the Queen of England, who didn't care. And it was a very different kind of wilderness, where you could happily pick a bay, build a house, live there your entire life if you wanted to, and nobody would stop you. And if something happened, you broke your leg and had to go to the hospital, if you went to the nearest hospital, you would be treated well. I mean, it was a very different kind of society. It was actually now we call it socialism in a way that actually worked. I used to dream of, still do in some ways, of going back up the coast and building another treehouse someday. But I'm not sure if I ever will. Well, I lived there 3 years, and it's very memorable. Every day was magic in a way, just waking up right over the water, but not total wilderness. In the distance, you would see the city of Vancouver, and I could paddle a mile across the inlet and go to the Dollarton shopping plaza that had a Royal Bank and a liquor store. You were treated always sort of like a wild animal. I mean, there's what's this guy in a kayak? And I remember coming into some cove, and there was a guy with his beautiful yacht. So he invited me on board and gave me a gin and tonic, and I remember him telling me, son, you don't appreciate this now, but someday you're gonna have everything, and you're gonna look back and
you're gonna see these are the best days.
Yeah, and you better appreciate it. You don't have this big yacht. You don't have a law firm to go back to or whatever. And yeah, now I do, but I didn't realize it at the time.
But now you've bought a boat.
Now I've finally got the boat I always wanted, a little 30-foot small. It's sort of the smallest boat that has everything you need, and a diesel.
Where are you going to head, do you think?
Back to, the beer parlor Alert Bay, or just places I used to go. And now I'm going to be that guy, the old guy with the nice boat anchored out in the cove.
And a guy is going to paddle in a BAIDARKA with an aluminum frame. Maybe he'll have no idea who you are.
But that's really what that's the plan.